Based on my background, been in many, worked for several government agencies throughout the years, and talking to Chris, he thought you guys might find this beneficial, so I'm just gonna get started. Pros of government work, most people know you have stability. It's mission driven. You're contributing to whatever agency you're working with. It could be national security, diplomacy, or and just public service in general. There's many avenues for growth. Some positions, not all, of course, have some work-life balance, just depending on what role you're seeking out. You get exposure to diverse missions and things like that. You just really want to keep moving and not kind of get sedentary in the same position. Find openings and move around in there, to try and not get stagnated into one position. There's always bureaucracy, things like that. Government isn't without its own challenges. You're always navigating red tape, and that can be frustrating for some. And, issues of innovation, limitations, encounter burnout, which, that I experienced that in my role with Homeland Security, being the only one. When you see me put Team Solo in there, it's like I'm the only one that was supporting seven airports by myself, in the local South Carolina region. And that kind of gets a little difficult. Each agency has its own complexity. Department of State, you had diplomatic challenges. In when I was with Department of Defense, it was more operationally focused. Getting started, there's, pathways to entry, of course, are for the GS positions, or, direct government paths would be USA Jobs. That's your portal for finding those positions. You have direct hire authorities for veterans, students, specialized roles. Working, maybe an entry as a contractor before you step into a direct, USA job role might be a way for you to get known within the community and make those connections to get the GS role. With that said, it's essential to network and connect, with, the people in those areas, and, make sure before applying that you meet those eligibility requirements, and tailor your resume to highlight your relevant experience. Go next. The clearance. A lot of people have questions about that. I've always been, every position I see, which, being in the IT roles, have always required a clearance. And, that's your barrier to entry, really. So a lot of times your contractors and whatnot will sponsor, and you'll want to, in the job description, it'll either say clearance required, which means you already have to have an existing clearance, and then, or it'll say ability to obtain. So, which that means, they'll sponsor you so long as, you meet the requirements and things like that for the position. They'll send you information to fill out the SF-86, and you have so many hours to do that, once you receive it, or they kind of shut it down. So, be mindful of that, and, be very truthful, because they are investigating you thoroughly, and also keep in mind, if you have any financial, like credit issues, legal issues, those things may impact your eligibility. But, sometimes if you're at least honest about it, they'll make that a consideration, depending on the severity, of a hit on your credit report or things like that. And of course, the sponsoring employer or agency does cover all the costs of that. You would never, if anybody's telling you that they'll, you got to pay a certain amount of money and they'll provide you a clearance, it would definitely be a scam. The agencies, or like, say, if you had a job interview with Leidos and they told you, that they could get you cleared, they're not going to obviously ask you for money for that. Government frameworks to know, since this is a GRC channel, obviously you want to be able to, talk and, elaborate on experience, knowledge of, the NIST CSF. Some positions, like Like, for example, I've worked with a GSA company that they needed a 800-171 because they're not a government entity, but they do handle CUI, which is the Controlled Unclassified Information. And PBO would definitely be who you'd speak to about 803, FedRAMPs, cloud services. Just make sure you're knowledgeable, CMMC. It's like your contractors and things like that. If you, like, say, the contractor for a government agency would need to meet certain cybersecurity standards, and that frequently required for roles, provides competitive edge, those kind of things. But as all the federal agencies pretty well use most the FedRAMPs 853. My experience has pretty well been with CSF and 171 at this point. Crafting the resume requires a very different approach than a private sector. These are much more detailed, and often they could be upwards. There's no limit on the federal resume because you have to be very detailed, and you want to be specific, because they have you know you'll see in the job description, they're called factors. And like purpose of contacts, who you worked with, and the nature of your interactions, scope and effect of your work, which would be how it impacted your programs or missions, and highlight any knowledge of frameworks. For example, 853, and you'd want to use measurable accomplishments such as reduce costs by 15% through a redesigned workflow, would be an example of that. Then you'd just want to tailor your resume to the job description and use action-oriented language, such as developed, led, optimized, things like that. And then, the leadership, problem solving, those are all big things. You just really want to just drill down into the job description and make sure you're covering all the factors and, hit each one of those. Navigating the job opportunities, for direct GS positions and whatnot, you'd want to use USA Jobs for that. And OPM provides information on benefits, training, and workforce resources once you were in those positions. You just want to keep checking the USA Jobs. You can't like, you'll see most of the time it'll say open and close by, and then you might not hear anything for a long time, just depending on, and then sometimes they'll have, some put in there that are, really quick. But just make sure, you meet the eligibility requirements. If it says, veteran or whatever, which that's rare that, they're only open to veterans and things like that. Just be mindful of, if it's internal hire, veteran hire, things like that. And here's contracting opportunities, clear jobs, clearance jobs. There's one I had on here. Yeah, this GSA e-buy, small, if you're, kind of doing entrepreneurial, small business, independent contractors, this is a good one to see what's out there. DICE, LinkedIn, of course. And finally, my advice is, make sure when you're looking at the position, know your why, and, make sure that, if you want to work, just make sure that you're behind the purpose and support that mission, focus on the impact of your work, and whether it's something you really stand behind. And while you're in those positions, build your network, because those are the ways that you get to, kind of move around and find different opportunities, just like in any other position. The GovLoop is a really good professional community in the government space. When you're in those positions, each one of them has their own different, hierarchies and acronyms and things like that. And it may take you a little while to figure those out, just like with any any company, or they have their different acronyms and things like that. It took me a while, even with Homeland Security, to figure out, it's like, what's an LTSO, an STSO, those kind of things. So, and obviously set boundaries, because they, as a contractor, they're always going to try and be like, you're a contractor, oh, you should be doing this. Well, if it's not in your scope of work, don't do it, because you're setting an expectation that, they'll come back and be like, oh, well, you did this for me before. Well, just make sure you don't put yourself in that position, just because, they, once you do that, you're thinking, oh, you're making the customer happy. Well, then that you've set that expectation, and then in the future, if you don't do it anymore, once you find out that that's not part of the scope of work, then they start kind of complaining, or whatever, that you're not up to their standards, because you're no longer doing that thing that wasn't part of the contract. Obviously, you want to stay adaptable and things like that, because those kind of things do change. Like I said before, you just want to keep growing. I wouldn't stay in a position a long time if you find that you're not growing in that position and you want to move around and things like that. Just always keep looking for those kind of positions for your next step. A lot of times the companies will pay for those certifications and things like that for you to move around. That's all I have.